We are super excited to have you here. I'm really excited to introduce myself and my colleague, Julia, who's here with us. But thanks for being here and to be good with our time and make sure that we're getting rolling. Let's get started. Julia, you ready?
Let's do this.
Okay, cool. All right. In case y'all don't know, my name is Brendan Finch. My pronouns are he, him. I taught middle and high school science for 7 years in Los Angeles at both public and charter schools. I left the classroom to build, we have a sister website called rocketlit.com. And I left the classroom to work on that. And I also started writing assessments on InterOrbit. Since, building those assessments, I've transferred out. We're now working on some new content, which I'm really excited. We just had a webinar about this a couple of weeks ago. If you were there, I know at least one of you who was here was. Then you know that we're working on some new content and doing a little bit of research to figure out how we can best meet the needs of students and teachers outside of formal assessments. So really excited to share all of that. And I'm also excited to introduce my wonderful colleague, Julia. Julia?
Thank you so much, Brendan. So my name is Julia. I used to be a teacher for elementary students, and then I was moved on to be a tutor in the Dominican Republic, which was very fun. I've been building materials to support teachers and districts with NGSS implementation for the last 2.5 years, and I'm InterOrbit's district engagement manager. So if you're interested in piloting or trying the platform, just shoot me an email and I'll be ready to help you do that.
All right, thanks, Julia, for introducing yourself. And without further ado, let's dive into our webinar for today. So we're talking about preparing for the new New York Science Test, and our objective, because we are objective driven here, is to analyze release test items and then dive into some resources and strategies from one of our partners over at Smithtown Central School District. Shout out to Stephanie O'Brien to help practice and prepare for the elementary and intermediate science tests. We're going to be here for about 60 minutes. This is being recorded, so if you're like, oh, I only have 20 minutes, then no worries. You can watch this 1.5 speed after we send it out tomorrow or Thursday. Our agenda is we're going to go over some release test items, do some analysis on this, and then talk about the PLDs and the importance of those through a little clip from Steph. And then we'll talk about 3D standards and how those 3D standards can be scaffolded up to. We've got some questions on that. Steph is going to pop in for another second to share the paradigm shift that's happening. Assessments. We'll show you some of InterOrbit's items. Many of y'all here use InterOrbit, and if you don't, then we'd love to show you around. We'll also talk about using Phenomena for test prep to make sure that y'all know how you can use Phenomena, not only just through a unit, but using them as daily do nows. And also you have these cool things called SCP practice problems, which may be helpful for giving you ways to practice those SCPs. And then we've got some closing thoughts from Ms. Stephanie O'Brien on district collaboration and some of the best PD resources that she and her colleagues have been using. So super excited to dive in, and thank you all for introducing yourselves in the chat. I can see this is going to be a lively conversation, so really, really excited to get started. And if you're watching this as a recording, feel free to make comments and we'll respond to your comments on the video as well, because we'd love to hear from you. All right, let's get started. So real quick overview, InterOrbit has Phenomena. And with the New York Science Test, students need to be taking ideas that they learn in class and applying them to novel, specific things that happen in the natural world. And so we aggregate these things. We make them a little bite-sized, and so that students can take, whatever they learn in a unit in your classroom. The Africa storyline was one of the things that was mentioned from Dr. Crean, and they can take that and then apply it to another thing. So another example of an ecosystem or different interactions that, we put together so that they can make sense of something novel that they have not seen before. And along with those phenomena, we write lots of questions. The topic of this webinar is preparing for this new test. And we have a very kind of interesting way that we approach writing questions for this. These aren't just a bunch of questions that would be on the test. We think about writing them in a very scaffolded way and pulling very specific data from those questions. And I'll show you what that looks like in a little bit. And with all of those questions, as students take them, you get really detailed data in your reports. So you can look at not just what SCP a question was tied to, but what specific pieces of that SCP they're tied to. The science and engineering practices are really complicated, and it's useful to know, are we talking about developing models about describing and predicting phenomena? Are we talking about using a model to test cause and effect relationships? Or are we talking about developing a model to describe unobservable mechanisms, which are all specific pieces of the developing and using models SEP. So we report out on those because we write questions for each of those really discrete and specific parts. Great. And thank you so much, Julia. So if you want to chat about InterOrbit or try it out, you can click on one of those two links that Julia dropped in the chat. You can meet up with us or just explore it on your own. That's the second link to start on your own if you want to poke around. Now let's dive into some item analysis and examples from New York State. And to kick that off, I want to frame this I know that this process of transitioning to this new assessment is a challenge. And needless to say, we work with other districts in other states that have had assessments since 2019, and it's still a challenge for them. So this is a marathon, not a sprint. And so you're going to see lots and lots of ideas presented here. And frankly, these are things that we also talk about with lots of other people across all of the states that we support. So to kind of introduce ourselves to some of the unique challenges that New York faces, I'm really excited to introduce Stephanie O'Brien. So she isn't physically here speaking, but we have some recordings of a chat that she and I had. If you don't know Stephanie O'Brien, she's currently the Director of Science K-12 at Smithtown Central School District. They're a partner district of InterOrbit. We're really excited to work with her, and I know some of y'all are here as well. So thanks for coming. So a couple things that I want you to pay attention to as we listen to her speak about these challenges are the shift in instructional pedagogy. And I want you to listen to what she says about elementary versus secondary. Each different area presents unique challenges for students and for teachers. And then also just, the issue of access to PD and support materials. And I think support materials can be, obviously materials that you're using in your classroom instructionally, or just to contextualize what these standards are and what the assessment is going to look like. We'll talk about the assessment challenges and the release items from the state. Yay! But also the fact that it would be useful maybe to have more resources and more examples for understanding the design and to make sure that implementation leads up to what that final goal is, which is this assessment. Cool. So these are just focus points for us to consider as we dive into listening to Stephanie talk about this. So let's take a minute and we'll hop over to listen to Stephanie talk about the biggest challenges in preparing for the New York Science Test. Stephanie, take it away.
Probably the biggest challenge overall was just the shift in pedagogy for instructional purposes for our teachers. So at the elementary level, especially, the teachers are responsible for teaching multiple subject areas. So to be able to provide them with the professional development they need and the support materials they need has been key, but it takes a lot of time. So at the secondary level, we've been spending so much time trying to get ready, and we're aware that these are coming. And there's been lots of professional development offered at that level, but trying to really shift the mindset of people has been very challenging. And not only at the elementary level, we also have at the high school level, so many teachers have done things for so long a certain way. So trying to get those teachers to be able to shift their instruction has been very challenging. The amount of professional development, and really there's not a lot available. Like you may have one, let's say, expert in biology in your BOCES center in the area, and there's not really a lot of subs. So trying to get teachers access to the professional development is difficult as well. The second thing that really teachers are really struggling with, I would say, would be assessments, and that the assessment hasn't been released for what the new exam is going to look like. We have samples, but teachers, thrive from looking at what, this backwards design of what does it actually look like. And if I know what it looks like, I could try to mimic it in my class. So teachers are still using traditional assessments that they've been using for years because that's what they're comfortable with. And this 8th grade and this 5th grade exam are coming. There hasn't been time taken to adjust the actual assessments that they have now that they have the sample. I think it's a shift getting people to try to accept that this is the reality, that this is happening, it's coming. And you need to really work together to try to find ways to collaborate and create assessments that will align with the new assessment.
All right, awesome. Thank you, Stephanie, for sharing some of those challenges that y'all are facing. Whether you're in Smithtown or elsewhere, these are challenges that we hear not just from folks in New York or in Long Island, but folks across the state. There's a lot of work to be done around these assessments, and these are really, really complicated things. And so let's dive into some of the example items that have been given. And I'm going to pick apart a single item from the intermediate science test. So these are one of the released items. And I want us to think about sort of like what this item is asking students and how this is different from what they had been doing in previous years. So first off, there are just a couple of images given, and these are models. So the first image is this model, or the model below, represents the bones in an arm of an extinct dinosaur called Velociraptor. I'm not going to make any Jurassic Park references today, but And then they'll give a second model, which is the models below represents the bones and the arms of 4 organisms currently alive today. So already you can see that there's a comparison being made between this model of a fossil and then these currently living organisms. And the question asks for students, the prompt says, identify the organism alive today that is most closely related to the velociraptor. Use evidence from the models to support your choice. Students have to list the organism and then write down evidence that aligns to that. So in the chat, what I'd like you to consider is, how is this question different from the prior, either intermediate or elementary, or if you're at the Regents level, you can think about the high school assessments. How is this question different? What do students have to do differently in this assessment question versus ones that we'd seen prior? It says evidence and there's a blank, so they need to write that down. I also saw people talking about comparing 2 different models and having to look at model A versus model B. I read some folks talking about the fact that now we have to compose a response, which is super, super interesting. And you can't rely on memorized facts. So I really, really like this analysis in the chat as well, that you can't just memorize, what's different or the same between dinosaurs and current species that are living and hanging out, because you're going to get something novel on the assessment. So students obviously need to be used to looking at things that they're not comfortable with and haven't seen before and pulling evidence and making sense of those things. Love it. Okay, great responses, y'all. So interesting. It's very clear to me that you understand the differences between these prior questions and these current questions. And I'll just say that we had a webinar similar to this a year ago, and the thoroughness of the answers in the chat this year are a testament to how much work has been done preparing everyone for this new assessment. So I just want to say kudos to y'all for giving such thorough and specific responses, because this was not the case last year when we did this. I think everyone has grown a lot in their understanding of these standards and the difference between these assessments. So if you're a science or curriculum director and you're on here, you're doing a great job, because we're seeing a lot of really, really interesting responses. Okay, great job, y'all. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay, cool. So I want to move on and I want to talk a little bit more about the PLDs. And this is something that Stephanie is going to share more thoughts on as well. But the PLDs are really interesting and they are unique to New York. So no other states have these types of resources to really clearly guide where students are at. And I think that the PLDs provide such explicit evidence for what students should be doing to show that they know something, or what are the sort of like ways they can approach that level of proficiency. And so let's dive into a specific standard here. So this is going to be kind of the place that we sit for the rest of the session. And this is the same standard that release test item is relating to. And this is MS-LS 4.2. So this is the middle school life science standard, where students are asked to apply scientific ideas to construct an explanation for the anatomical similarities and differences among modern organisms and between modern and fossil organisms to infer evolutionary relationships. So students are using that performance expectation has baked in these 3 different dimensions. And so those 3 dimensions are the SCPs and the DCIs. So the SCP of constructing explanations and designing solutions. This is like what students need to do. That's one of the 3 dimensions. The DCI are what students know, so the content. That's usually how we hear these referred to. So these are core ideas, things you need to know and then apply, probably through the lens of the SCP. So how do I use that to construct an explanation? Or through the cross-cutting concept, which are sort of the lenses that students can use to analyze phenomena. So what patterns do I see here? And specifically, this is really interesting. The cross-cutting concept pattern says below, there's a bullet point. These are called elements, the more specific pieces of that cross-cutting concept. And it says patterns can be used to identify cause and effect relationships. So we're just not saying there are similarities in the bones, but we're explicitly using those similarities, those anatomical similarities, to say that this means, or this is evidence of this relationship, this evolutionary relationship. And so that cause and effect part of the patterns is very, very important. And so we'll dive into that in just a second. Okay, cool. So if you're not familiar with these PLDs, which I hope you are, that's okay, because we're going to go over them in some great depth as we move forward. So Stephanie's going to talk about this a little bit more. So we're going to dive into a dissection of a PLD. And I think, the way to think about this is, how can we answer these questions? And this is, I think, what the PLDs are intended to do, which is, what is the standard actually saying? So that thing that we just saw, this big thing, that's kind of a mess. There's a lot there. I was talking to an ELA teacher over the weekend, and she was telling me, she's like, those standards that you have are really gnarly standards. It's difficult to understand what's happening. The PLDs, however, they do provide a really, really discrete lens for like, what does this mean? What's the thing that is happening here? And then also as instructional leaders, we can think about, so did I give an opportunity to practice this in my class? Do I know what this means? And did we do this? So could they do this on an assessment, which is really, really interesting. They are short and sweet, which is really nice. Whereas the standards and the evidence statements and the framework are like really doozies, but these are short and sweet. They are not simple though, just because they are short. They require some analysis. And then once you do some analysis on what you're doing in your classroom now and what you see in these PLDs, you can then build some activities to meet the PLD. And you can build those in a scaffolded manner, going from 1 to 2 to 3, or you can just hit that 3 and that 4, and that's wonderful. I do see a question in the chat that I want to respond to. Do we know how they'll be grading it? For example, if a student says the wrong organism but provides a decent comparison to the evidence. So I'm not sure what the grading looks like for those free response questions. I do think that there are going to be a lot more multiple choice questions than there are free response questions, but I know that there are people here. I know that there's at least one person here who is working on the PLDs and is working on writing assessment items for New York State. So if that person wants to speak up, you're welcome to, or if anyone wants to speak up, that would be awesome. But that's my assumption, is looking at other state tests, there are a lot more multiple choice items, so there's not a lot of room for interpretation. However, there will be free response items, and there's usually a rubric for that where we measure, either students meet the standard or they don't meet the standard. And there's clear criteria for that. So other states that have free response questions have rubrics that are either, 2-point rubrics or 1-point rubrics, like you either got it or you didn't get it. And there's a clear, if they say this, or if they say one of the organisms and evidence, they got it. So there will probably be some very, very specific. Aha. Okay. So it looks like I see in the chat that there may be 60% multiple choice. And I do believe that these will be in clusters because, as we've seen in the release test items, there are clusters of questions in there too. So 2 questions in the chat just to respond to those real quick. And now let's cruise on. Please write questions in the chat. Please. I want to hear a little bit more from Stephanie around how can teachers leverage those PLDs in instruction or in assessment, maybe and or as well. I'm gonna make this a little louder for y'all.
Now we have PLDs, or performance level descriptors, and those are so key to helping teachers try to dissect what is the standard actually saying and how to use it in my classroom. So if you think about like a level 3 is actually what the standard is saying. So this is how a student would meet a standard. Like every teacher should be diving deep into those PLDs to make sure that they're actually teaching what the standard is saying. That probably is the greatest resource that a teacher could want or need. When I've done professional development, even with my own teachers, they said, well, I don't think I actually provided kids that opportunity to do that in my class. So you as a teacher, if you're not doing that with your kids, how on an assessment would they ever be able to do that? It says multiple pieces of evidence. I should give my kids multiple pieces of evidence to be able to develop a claim or whatever the question is asking. And oftentimes teachers don't do that because they just don't know. And you get so overwhelmed. This is short enough. It's like short and sweet, these documents that at least you could say like, okay, this is what I have to do. As long as you're doing that, it's kind of like a checkbox. So some teachers are liking it as, okay, I feel better that I'm doing all of these things. But again, those are the types of things that you really have to dive deep into. You have to take some time looking at the PLDs and saying, okay, this is what I'm supposed to be teaching. And making sure that you have activities that actually do that to try to see where is the gap? Like, what is it that we need to do some curriculum writing because we don't have anything for this. There was one standard our teachers were looking at the other day and they were like, we don't use fair tests. And we don't even know what that would look like. So there needs to be time for teachers to look at that, say, this is what we need to do. We need to develop an activity that does X, Y, or Z to meet the standard.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Stephanie. And thanks for asking questions in the chat, y'all. It's super interesting to read your questions. There was a question that asked, does that 60% multiple choice apply to the high school regents level as well? And somebody sent a message to host and panelists, but the answer was yes. And so if you're wondering that, it sounds like the new assessments will be 60% multiple choice and 40% for response, which is similar in ratio and proportion to what we see in other states. So it looks like in the release test items, which are majority for response, you're going to see a lot more multiple choice questions on this year's tests. But keep the questions coming in. We'll do our best to answer them. And thanks for just participating and being present. I really appreciate it. Cool. So let's look at these PLDs. So the standard that we're looking at here is MS-LS42, and we just looked at the performance expectation. Let's go back to that really quick just to see kind of the, what we're looking at. So this is what the performance expectation looks like, but we do hear a lot of teachers and administrators and frankly everyone asking, but what does that actually mean? Like, what do I actually do? As we're going to see in the PLDs, you can, construct an explanation or apply scientific ideas to construct an explanation. That can mean lots of different things. Obviously, on the test, there are going to be multiple choice questions that are, that meet constructing explanations and designing solutions. So what does that look like? What does it look like to have a multiple choice question around that? Let's dive back into this PLD. So the level 4, which is beyond the level of performance expectations, this is an advanced performance. And on the test, we are not going to see level 4s. They're going to write questions to level 3s and level 2s. So really important to note, you're not going to see these on there. But what this says is that students should apply scientific ideas to construct an explanation. I wonder where that part is highlighted blue. Weird. Using qualitative and quantitative data for the anatomical similarities and differences among modern organisms and between modern and fossil organisms to infer evolutionary relationships. So really specifically what this question or what this prompt says is they need to construct an explanation using qualitative and quantitative data. So really explicitly, those two pieces need to be present. If we walk back to the level 3, now this is the level that you're going to see questions on the state test looking like. And so this is just apply scientific ideas to construct an explanation. So we're losing the qualitative and quantitative element here, which is really important. And the rest of it is identical. So we're looking at the similarities and differences among modern organisms and between modern and fossils to infer evolutionary relationships. So at the very least, your students need to be able to meet this level 3 in order to achieve proficiency on the new test. But what does progressing toward proficiency look like? And so that's going to be the level 2. So this asks students to identify the evidence that supports an explanation for anatomical similarities and or differences among modern organisms or between modern organisms and fossil organisms to infer evolutionary relationships. So really important here, we see you can either show those things between modern organisms or do it between modern and fossil. So this gives a lot more wiggle room in terms of like the types of questions you can answer. And then finally, what an emerging level of proficiency looks like in this case is identify the explanation from those provided that supports the evidence for, and again, it's anatomical similarities and or differences among modern organisms or between modern and fossil organisms. So in each of these, that blue highlighting is for, does anyone know what the blue, the orange, and the green are for? All right, well, I'll let you figure it out in the chat. That level 3 is what we're aiming for and what you're going to see questions written on the state test that are aligned to, and that is what the performance expectation asks. You need to, construct an explanation, and that's what they have to do here. The qualitative and quantitative data in the level 4, that goes beyond what the performance expectation asks. But on your state test, there will not be questions like that. However, so if you have students doing the things that are at the level 3, at the level 4, then, they are going to be much better prepared for anything that they need to do at the level 2 or level 1. So a question real quick, I'm going to flip back to that slide and show you that release test item one more time. But I want you to think about this and we'll launch a poll to answer it. What level of the PLD is this released item? What level of the PLD is this released item? So it says identify the organism alive today that is most closely related to the Velociraptor. Use evidence from the models to support your choice. Do you think this is a PLD level 2, level 3, level 4, level 5? Or well, there's no level 5, so don't write that. Do you think it's PLD 1, 2, or 3? It looks like we have PLD level 1 twice. Don't vote for PLD level 1. It's not that. All right, we've got a lot of responses. Thank you to all y'all who submitted responses. So it looks like the answers are, or the majority says either it's a level 2 or a level 3. That's pretty interesting because the level 3 says that you need to construct an explanation, and the level 2 says identify the evidence that supports an explanation. And so this is where, technically they are identifying evidence to how something is related, but they do have to construct that. They have to write that down. and describe those things. So I think this is a really interesting question because it could be interpreted as a level 2, and it could also be interpreted as a level 3 because they actually have to write it down. And they're not just identifying it's this evidence that supports that explanation, which is really interesting. Thank you all so much for sharing your thoughts. Super, super interesting stuff. Okay, cool. We're going to revisit questions like that another time in a little bit. Okay, cool. So performance expectation, one more time, ask students to construct explanations, ask them to apply their understanding of evidence of common ancestry and diversity, and then patterns. And those patterns are used to identify cause and effect relationships, so those evolutionary relationships. And that is all baked into that question there. Now, whether you think it's a level 2 or a level 3, it's probably not a level 4, that, that's up to you. But this is what students need to be able to do. And to Stephanie's point earlier, if you don't have experiences in your classroom where students are doing this thing to new things that you didn't talk about in class, so you have your phenomenon class, and you may explain how these things are similar, and then you have to give them a different thing, a new phenomena, because on the test they'll see a new phenomena. Great question. So there's a question in the chat that I want to address, which I think is a really great question. Thank you so much, Bill. So is it reasonable to assume that the majority of the multiple choice questions will be getting kids to a level 2, and the short response will prompt the level 3 questions? So I think the answer is definitely yes, that those level 3 questions in almost all of the PLDs ask students to construct, they ask students to explain, they ask students to analyze data where they have to write down what that looks like. I think it's possible to write questions that could be interpreted as level 3 that are multiple choice, but my gut tells me that those level 3 questions will be the application constructing questions. Yep. And also, as was mentioned in the chat, thank you so much, Glenn, that high school will have 5 levels instead of the 4 that you're seeing for elementary and middle school. And so at the 5 levels, you're going to see the level 4 as being proficient, and then those 3 levels leading up to that, and level 5 will be beyond that. So high school has more levels, middle school or elementary and intermediate have less levels. Great questions, y'all. Thank you so much. Okay, so within the InterOrbit framework and kind of like our lens that we see these, we want to think about how we can scaffold students up to that point. So seeing what students need to do is really, really interesting in those PLDs. Now let's talk a little bit more how we might scaffold up to this point. And so those 3-dimensional performances, those sense-making performances, kind of the questions, the free response question that we saw, those are the end goal. So before students get to that point, they need to use their knowledge, and they need to have that knowledge, and they need to apply that through the lens of the cross-cutting concept and the SCP. That's why all 3 were color-coded on those questions to explain why or how something is happening. So they can't just identify an explanation. They can't just identify evidence. They need to explain why or how these things and this evidence leads to that stuff. And that's the important part there. So the question we want to pose and also answer immediately after is, how do we scaffold them up to this point? So we like to think about the invisible steps that we're asking students to take. So making connections between specific parts of the standard, and then gathering data on each step to best support those students. And so we want to think about the journey from representing their knowledge, so memorization and things that you know, like we talked about this in class. Here's a question on the thing we talked about in class, to that velociraptor versus all of those other animals and explaining the similarities. That's novel. So one of the ways that we think about this is by looking at specific phenomena and then asking specific questions about those phenomena. So on InterOrbit, here's one of the phenomena that we have on the site, which is, why do these snakes have secret legs? So this, talks about boas and pythons, and they have these body parts. They're called spurs, which are those little nuggets down there on the bottom of the danger noodles. And, they don't really use them for anything, or at least it does not appear that they do. However, we can see that in fossilized species from 120 million years ago, and I may just absolutely butcher this, but it's Tetrapodophis, that those organisms from 120 million years ago, they had these tiny little legs. Look at those little guys down there. Those legs. And the rest of it looks just like a snake. So that's really, really interesting. And so obviously you can see the similarity between the velociraptor and those other organisms, which is, like how do the similarities and differences between these organisms show those relationships? So the free response question that we ask students is this. And so on our site, we call these sense-making questions, or summative. They're intended to be used in a summative way. But we'll say, use evidence from figures 1, 2, and 3 to explain why boa constrictors may have these secret legs or spurs. In your explanation, include how these spurs can help scientists reconstruct the evolutionary history of boa constrictors. So we want to use those patterns, to identify cause and effect relationships, right, about diversity and evidence of common ancestry, and construct an explanation in order to do that. So those three dimensions sort of baked into this question. So students use the SEP to construct an explanation, that DCI of evidence of common ancestry and diversity, and the patterns, but the patterns are used in service of being very, very specific. So we're going to drop another poll in, and I'd love to hear y'all's opinion on this. So do you think that this is hitting the PLD level 1, 2, or 3? And we'll drop that poll in a second, and you can vote. And I know there's level 1 twice, so please don't vote. But what do y'all think? How does this question fit within I appreciate the multiple modalities. You can answer in the chat, you can answer in the poll, anywhere you want to answer is fine. Somebody had to answer PLD level 1. Okay. All right, cool. Let's end the poll and we'll share the results. So there was a consensus except for that one, we don't know who it is, but I appreciate it. You said PLD level 1, one of the PLD level 1s. So PLD level 3 is right. So this is students are constructing explanation, and they need to show evidence of common ancestry. They don't need qualitative versus quantitative evidence. That was definitely that was level 4 of the PLD, which was not an option on this poll. It's a good thing. And they need to apply their, the anatomical similarities and differences in order to explain that common ancestry and diversity. And they have to construct an explanation citing evidence for that. So awesome job. Yes. So on Orbit, we do have these questions that are intended to be used for that summative, at the end of the PLD. So this meets the level 3 of the PLD. And so we write other questions as well, which we intend to scaffold from students' understanding of the idea that there are these different organisms and that they've changed over time, and that we have fossils of them to show that, to this 3-dimensional performance. And so we write these questions that are 2-dimensional. So very explicitly writing questions about just the DCI, the knowledge, and the cross-cutting concept, or the DCI and the SEP. And with that, I'm going to walk you through some of our different question types that would lead up to that question. So I want you to think about this through the lens of PLDs. So are we identifying an explanation? Are we identifying evidence? Or are we constructing an explanation? Those are the 3 different levels broadly. There's a little bit more to it than that. So our first questions, or one of our lower question types, are called core content questions. And so we like to think about these at the beginning of students' journey of just showing what they know. Their knowledge, the DCI only. So we'll tag these questions to just the DCI. And this question says, which of the following best describes how the vestigial legs of boa constrictors are evidence of evolution? Their ancestors once had legs, but the snakes have evolved to move on land without legs. So are we identifying evidence to support an explanation? Are we identifying an explanation, or are we constructing an explanation here? The answer is we are identifying an explanation, which is the PLD level 1. Cool. So moving up through our different levels of questions, we also have questions that are 2-dimensional called content and practices. So this one hits the DCI and the SEP. So we like to think about this after we validate that students have that knowledge. What's the next hardest question that we can ask them? Next, more rigorous question. So in this case, which of the following pieces of fossil evidence would best support the explanation that lizards and snakes are related? Are we identifying explanation? Are we identifying evidence? Or are we constructing an explanation? So this is a PLD level 2, where we are identifying evidence to support an explanation. We're deliberately leaving out the cross-cutting concept in this question and just asking them to construct that explanation. And so the intent is to scaffold up to the level we want them to get to. And after that, we'll ask questions. We also have questions that are tied to the DCI and the cross-cutting concept. So these will ask very explicitly patterns. So which student identified a pattern that is supported with evidence from figures 1 and 3? So we want them to identify an explanation, or identify a pattern in this case. So we're leaving out the SEP. We just are asking about evidence of common ancestry and patterns, and seeing which of these students identified this correct thing. So in this way, we're able to take all of this information from here, and you can build assessments on InterOrbit if that's something that you want to do, where you can ask questions about students' knowledge and scaffold up to those 2-dimensional questions about the content practices or about the content and concepts. And then at the, at the peak of that, these 3-dimensional sense-making questions. And so if you haven't been on the site before, we have lots of beautiful reports that detail not just where students are at with respect to a DCI, though we do break down a lot of information, but as students answer questions, we'll break down what part of the DCI students are struggling with for what performance expectation, and in addition, parts of the SEPs where students are struggling. And so if there is a part of the standards where we see that, we have some information that students are being more successful or less successful, we can either flex that muscle, that strength that students have, or help to support them in the areas where they need a little bit more support. And this is also true for the cross-cutting concepts, which have a lot of nuances. And so we can figure out maybe there's an explicit thing we need to talk about in class as students are going through and analyzing new phenomena, and we're going through activities instructionally. And those are areas where we can lean into and make sure we focus on. So this is one of the reports on InterOrbit. It's called the Dimensions Report that breaks down, you got it, the 3 dimensions. So the DCIs, the SCPs, and the cross-cutting concepts. All right, great. We'll go back to the scheduled program, deep dive into our next section, which focuses on preparing for the new investigations. So y'all in New York State have a very unique type of assessment structure, which I think this is a beautiful thing that y'all do. It's the practical part of science. And these are the investigations. And so I want you to listen to Steph talk about these investigations and some advice and some thoughts for greater success, knowing that these are coming and that you're able to get training on these things as well to prepare yourselves for these. And so let's dive into that real quick.
They need to run through these themselves before they do them with their kids. Even getting used to the structure of the lab is not a cookbook lab. This is, okay, you have multiple packets and pages, you have student answer copies, and there's some parts the students are working on together as a group. And the pedagogy is very different than the traditional cookbook lab, where students are really thinking and making meaning of the content through a phenomena or through some type of lab experience. And that's very different than what they may have seen before. So teachers are overwhelmed because they don't actually maybe know necessarily how to answer the questions, and that's fine. They will get the background training, but just that feeling of anxiety of this is different than what I've done before is a lot.
Thank you, Stephanie, for walking us through that. So obviously going through these, and this is something we consistently hear with other curricula as well, which is that the experiential learning. So as a teacher, going through the process of seeing these investigations and feeling those lessons or this phenomena as a student is really, really important. So Stephanie talked about this, that you need to run through these yourselves. So you need to go in to these investigations, go to an official PD or have, somebody at your school site run through them so you can feel what these would feel like from a student perspective, because it's very different than how all of us learned. And the complexity of these is much greater than they were before. They're not cookbook labs. They have multiple pages. There's lots of different pieces that are different than what you had done last year. And the other important thing is that they're all based around a phenomena. And so those phenomena those are things that in instruction, you should now show students, here is a thing. And I want you to think about how what you learned prior applies to this thing. So having those experiences in instruction and also in assessment. So obviously we've been talking about assessment a lot. We're focusing on prepping for the state assessments, but this is really, really important that we want to make sure that we are applying, or we're giving students opportunities to look at those phenomena before they get into an assessment. I see a question in the chat I just want to address saying, would a cluster scaffold up from a PLD 2 to 3 or 4 on the high school level? So I'm not sure what that looks like. That's a great question. If you are here and you're working on the state test and you want to answer that, so I'd love to hear. So would a cluster on the New York State test scaffold up from PLD 2 to 3 to 4 on a high school test? That was the question in the chat. It just went to the host and panelists, but I want to make sure everyone sees and hears it. So if you know the answer to that in the chat, you can write that. I do not. Cool. And with that, I am going to pass it over to my colleague, Julia, to walk you through how you may use phenomena for test prep, not just from a formal assessment, but in other ways in your classroom, and walking through some of the ways you can use InterOrbit's phenomena in your classroom to prep for the test. Julia, to you.
Thank you, Brendan. That has been a lot of information. And now, again, as you said, now that we've talked about what to do with assessment, let's cover what are other strategies that we could apply in the classroom for test prep too. So let's go back to our standard MSPS 4.2. And just to recap, it is asking students to apply scientific ideas to construct an explanation for the anatomical similarities and differences among modern organisms and between modern and fossil organisms to infer evolutionary relationship. We've mentioned using phenomena in assessments, but how can we give students more opportunities to make sense of phenomena throughout an entire unit? And what are the different types of experiences we can give them to practice for those rigorous questions? Let's make a little roadmap of phenomena we would use throughout this unit. And by the way, all of these are in orbit. So moving on. In the very beginning, we could start with discussing, why do whales have hip bones? And since we're still in the beginning of the unit, maybe we could consider a lower stake discussion, like a whole class walkthrough. And this is all about vestigial structures. And we talked about this with the snakes. These are bones that no longer serve a functional purpose, and how this provides evidence for evolutionary history, suggesting a time when whale ancestors had hind limbs. So we would include in this whole class walkthrough and discussion, we would include discussion questions that target the cross-cutting concepts and the science and engineering practices too, for the whole class to answer together. Moving on to the middle of the unit, we could talk about the reason why birds and bats have such different wings. And here we could consider separating the class in groups to answer questions collaboratively in a printed and scaffolded group phenomena exploration. Students would discuss that even though bat wings and bird wings share similarities in function, this does not transfer to their structure, and how these were similar adaptations to a flying lifestyle, but evolved independently. In this stage, students are answering rigorous questions, and they should be able to do so. They should be able to answer questions that target the DCIs, the cross-cutting concepts, and the SCPs, but with scaffolding maybe a little bit from their teachers and support from their group too. And lastly, we could assess students by building a short online assessment to be administered individually, covering the reason why some cave fish have eyes while others don't. And in this case, students would grapple individually with the fact that some cave fish species have reduced or non-functional eyes, as they live in very dark environments where vision is unnecessary. And in this final part of the unit, students should be ready to engage with rigorous sense-making questions. And teachers can still provide scaffolding as needed, but it's important to note that removing those scaffolds is crucial to help and build student independence and their confidence. And at this point, we have plenty of phenomena for this life science standard, but maybe our students are not there yet. And they're starting at a level where they need even more phenomena, and they need a lower level phenomena in order to access these rigorous things. So we've got this for that. And what we would recommend is to go from the on-grade level standard to a prior grade level standard. In this case, we're going back a whole grade level band to this third grade standard, where students have to analyze and interpret data from fossils to provide evidence of the organisms and the environment in which they lived long ago. So let's look at some phenomena for this. Again, all of these are in the website, and this is what we would use throughout this unit. And we can first discuss how can extinct giants teach us about ancient Earth. And all of this is about the giant rhino that lived 26 million years ago. And they were so big so that they could eat the leaves off of trees that were 50 feet above the ground. And then we could maybe go over the reason why you could find whales in the desert. And it's all about the fact that fossils are found where they used to live, and shows how this environment has changed. As we know, there are no whales in the desert now, so it's obviously something that has changed over time. And reviewing how we would use phenomena for test prep throughout a unit. So first of all, a main takeaway is that practice makes perfect. We should be using phenomena throughout all units, not only during test prep season. And this is very important. Using phenomena provides more opportunities for students to model and practice transferring knowledge and sense making. And if students are struggling with phenomena targeting their grade level band, we can always lower the stakes with a prior grade level phenomena to give further sense-making opportunities and identify possible gaps in knowledge or in skills. So other strategies we could use are these daily do-nows. And these are quick daily activities to review prior standards and or gain experience with novel phenomena. And we would recommend building one 4-question assessment per week. And these would be focusing on performance expectations and one performance expectation and one phenomena for that whole week. And each day's question will build in rigor to scaffold students to a rigorous 3-dimensional question by Friday. So in this case, we'd start with intro to phenomena, then on grade level knowledge questions, then we move on to formative questions, would include the CCC and the DCI, and then the SCP and the DCI, and finally, those summative questions that are just sense-making questions. Students would not submit this assessment until the end of the week. We can choose to review those questions with students each day, or do it at the end of the week. Okay, so another way that you could use this is phenomenal transfer stations. This actually came from our work with one of our partner districts in Maryland, where a teacher would print out summative assessments with different phenomena for the same standards and for students to explore in group. So a pro is that students keep seeing the same ideas from these different scenarios, and it sparks their curiosity and helps them make deep connections. And we would have formative questions to scaffold students up to a rigorous sense-making question. And some things to consider is that in these groups, teacher could assign roles. So it's like you read the phenomena, you're the recorder, you are the fact checker, and each student would have a role. And we also would recommend that students need to have a little bit of preparation before they're ready to work together towards this new scenario. So it's best to implement this towards the end of the unit, maybe mid-unit 2. And finally, we have a whole class debrief afterwards to make sure you can model for students the process of sense making one more time. And then on Inner Orbit, we also have SEB practice problems, and these are content agnostic sets of questions aligned to the K-12 progressions for science and engineering practices in elementary, middle, and high school with interesting and relevant phenomena. And we are intentionally leaving out the DCIs and the cross-cutting concepts to provide additional opportunities for students to practice the SEBs. And with these, students would focus only on the SEB to build skill and mastery and target specific growth. And now I'm going to pass it over again to Brendan and Stephanie to go over some additional ideas and wrap up our webinar. We're almost reaching the end of our time.
Well, thank you so much, Julia. So in my conversation with Stephanie, there were some other ideas that came up that didn't quite fit with the pieces that we've gone over so far, but I thought were really important and wanted to make sure that we can share. And so the first was, what are some of the best NGSS PD resources? So we're going to drop some links in the chat. So please click on those things because it disappears once we're gone. And if you're watching this as a recording, we will drop those links into this description of the video so you can find them in there.
Emily Kang is on the island. She's a local person. She's been great for, especially with our L population, of what are some specific strategies you could use to integrate language into your curriculum, especially trying to teach teachers to not front load vocabulary and let the kids use their own words to understand what is happening in the classroom and add those vocabulary later on as they start to develop. What are those actual words? Put them in afterwards. You don't have to start with the front load. It's not really effective. Oki Lee has developed different webinars. You could do CTLA credits and you could watch that online. The state has put it right on its website for additional resources on how to help with the transition to the new standards. So I found her particularly effective, like just to try to give students and teachers an overview of what's coming.
Cool. And that was super, super helpful. So if y'all have not watched after this conversation, I listened to a bunch of OK Lee's webinars on that website that Julia dropped in the chat. Thank you so much, Julia. You're going to find lots of links to these really beautiful video interviews and podcasts where OK Lee talks a lot about different ways that you can scaffold up and sort of like the framework for thinking about language in science, which is very, very helpful. And the next thing that Stephanie mentioned was, a collaboration do we need between New York districts and teachers? So I want to share these thoughts as well before we wrap up the webinar.
A lot of things are district owned. So there's been so much time for each single district is writing curriculum. There's been years and years in the making of these curriculum. And so districts aren't necessarily sharing them because they're the intellectual property of the district, but it's kind of silly that each district is working in a silo making these units when the reality is if we work together, we'd be able to create much richer storyline or just even the ideas for phenomena would be much, much stronger. So it's a shame that we don't have a structure in place to make that happen. If you think about the schools that maybe don't have as much money for professional development, they're kind of at a disadvantage because now their students aren't getting access to the same materials that a school maybe that had more money to dump into professional development is.
All right, so super interesting equity issues around professional learning and development. Really, really exciting to hear at least what is needed, because that way if you're here and you're like, hey, I want to do that, you can do it. It's really needed. So please help us to aggregate resources for all of the New York teachers that are out there. And with that, y'all, we're going to wrap it up. Thank you very, very much for joining us today. It was excellent to get to chat with you. So we did a lot today. And I am grateful for you walking through all of this with us. To kind of wrap up our webinar, if you would like to try InOrbit out in your classroom, you can find a time to pilot. And so we'll drop the links for that in the chat. And thank you if you enjoyed this. I really, really appreciate y'all being here and being present and participating, asking great questions. You can also sign up for a trial account if you go to inorbit.com and you don't want to talk to us, but you just want to like try it out on your own. Or follow us on social. We post YouTube videos, and these videos will be posted on YouTube as recordings. So if you want to see more content like this, then subscribe to us on YouTube and we'll post lots of cool stuff. Cool. Can't wait to see y'all the next time we're out there. If y'all are on Long Island, we will be at the Suffolk Mini Stannies Conference that's happening in March. Both Julie and I will be there. Can't wait. And if you're not there, then we'll see you at Stannies next year or at the next webinar that we do. But we are running webinars every month, and we would love to see you here. So thanks y'all for being here. Feel free to send us an email if you want to do that, or find a time on our calendar. Thank you, Julia, for dropping those links into the chat. Thanks y'all for being here. I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day.